This is just one of the sweetest episodes of all time. And it's the episode that I wish I had 10 years ago when I felt really lost and stressed all the time and wondered why I was incredibly calm in the face of huge family crises. And yet, when it came to answering a text message, my nervous system seemed to be in functional freeze. So today's episode will answer that for you if you also find yourself a type A, very tightly wound, high stress person who can somehow show up in emergencies and show up for everyone else in your life, but it feels nearly impossible for you to sit down and simply be with yourself and journal or meditate for 5 minutes, because doing the really simple things feel really hard when you are stuck in fight, flight, or freeze for most of your lives. So let's get into it. Today's episode, Michelle Shapiro, you guys already know. She's one of my favorite guests to have on this podcast. Our episode where we talked about histamine issues and how histamine intolerance, MCAS, is at the root of so many of the mystery chronic illness symptoms that people are experiencing today, went completely viral from season 5. And in that episode, we mentioned that we were going to do a follow-up, giving you guys solutions and real talk solutions about what you need to start doing today in terms of getting to the root of it. And a big part of that is building resilience in your nervous system. In that episode, we talked about how it can be so difficult to heal from histamine issues because so much of your immune system deciding to throw out a bunch of histamine from your mast cells is the fact that our immune systems are intertwined with our nervous systems. And even though there are other root causes of histamine intolerance and MCAS, like gut inflammation and gut infections or mold, the nervous system is such a big piece because as long as our nervous systems are in fight or flight mode all the time, as long as our nervous systems are overactivated and don't have the resilience to respond properly and then come down in the face of stressors, our immune systems are going to continue to get the message from our nervous systems that there is a constant threat and we just got to throw out histamine and other inflammatory chemicals all the damn time. So today we are going to dive into arguably the most important thing that you can do for histamine issues and MCAS before you do the gut tests, before you do the mold tests, even though those can be really important in your individual puzzle, your nervous system, building capacity and resilience, learning how to say no, learning how to stop people pleasing, doing the really hard things like learning that it's safe to be honest with the people in your life, even when that ruffles feathers. That is the nervous system work that so many of us, especially women, are not taught to do from a young age. And it's not often modeled to us by our families, which is why these cycles of nervous system suppression and overactivation are very familial cycles. They get passed down because this is often how our mothers acted. This is often familial patterns of dysfunction, and we are the ones who get to change it. But it takes hard work, it takes practice, and we're going to get into every single detail today. We're also going to talk about how difficult it can be to just hear things online, like all you need to do to heal is learn how to regulate your nervous system, when you've spent your lifetime dysregulated and things that are supposed to be safe actually feel extremely unsafe to you, and things that are unsafe, like chaos, are where your nervous system finds comfort. So this is not something you can walk backwards overnight. And in no way are we going to make it seem like it's easy in this episode. We are you. We're here for you. We are two lifelong dysregulated gals who come from those family patterns. And so we're going to also be really vulnerable and open and honest about what that has actually cost us and looked like in our real lives. Like, what are the things that have helped us to build more nervous system capacity? And we're going to talk about how many years it took to put those things into practice and give you that real life, honest experience. There's a few things we didn't have a chance to get into that I think are really important, like the role of challenging yourself to do hard things in little bites as much as you can handle them in order to build capacity, or even the role of faith in nervous system regulation and capacity, which I think is really important, and why I think it's such a beautiful thing that so many people have different faiths and belief systems. I think we actually need something to believe in. So I'm going to save those topics for a different solo episode where I just continue to expand on nervous system work and tools that you can lean on. So if you enjoy this episode after you listen today, I'm going to put a link in the show notes to our voice note service, and you can actually leave me a voice note with your follow-up questions on nervous system capacity through that link, so that in my follow-up, I can do a really big Q&A section and talk to you guys directly with anything that we didn't answer in this episode. So let's get into it. For my histamine, nervous system activated girlies, there is hope, there is relief. And Michelle and I are going to give you every single thing that we can today.
Let's talk real life, right?
I think the best way to move through life is to always be the student and to always be curious. Life will show you either way. It's just how you choose to listen. You can always count on you. You will always have your own back. This is not the last thing you'll create. Play is the process. Sometimes it has to be dramatic. That's the funny part. When your back's up against the wall, you will prevail. You're allowed to grow and change. You're allowed to birth something new. I hope you make your art.
So do we want to start off by talking about why histamine issues are related to the nervous system to begin with?
Absolutely.
Because I think where we left off in the last episode, people got a lot of context on like supplements and mast cell stabilizing nutraceuticals and herbs and all the things. And obviously you have to stabilize your mast cells once they're already activated and freaking out and releasing all the histamine. That's like the physical side of it. But most likely for a lot of people and for us, what got their mast cells to be so overactivated in the first place was probably their nervous systems reaching a breaking point and the body just being like, we're not safe, period.
Absolutely.
So let's talk about it.
Regarding just mast cells and our nervous system in general, mast cells are responsive to nerve signaling. So our nervous system connects with our immune system in a lot of different ways. So if your immune system's overactivated, there's a likelihood that your nervous system can become involved and vice versa. Because mast cells, again, are receiving threats from any direction they possibly can. So they're wanting to know, is the immune system sending me a threat? Is the nervous system sending me a threat? And that's how they're deciding how much histamine do I even send out. So there's a very clear connection, not even from this like theoretical level, there's a clear connection between the immune system and the nervous system.
Yeah, because I think sometimes I go the more like woo-woo spiritual sense of like, there's this huge spiritual piece of mast cell activation disorder or mast cell activation syndrome.
Yeah.
Both, where your body is kind of responding to a lack of safety in your life, where it's asking you to change certain things, change certain relationships, change the way that you're working or pushing yourself in order to be more aligned with what would be right for you as a person. So I often talk about it in that spiritual sense, but like you're saying, there's an actual physiological map as to how we can relate the immune response being activated and the nervous system being activated. They're just designed to work hand in hand.
Absolutely. We can use both the spiritual aspect and the physical aspect when we're working with ourselves, when we're working with practitioners. I think, this is something that I wanted to talk to you about, and I'm really excited that we're going to talk about is the spiritual piece of the conversation. And I want to tell a story really quick about a client of mine who is like just so special to me. And she'll know the second I start talking about her, she'll know exactly who it is. And she will definitely listen to this because she always listens to your podcast as well. And so she was experiencing what we later found out to be tremendous histamine intolerance and kind of like POTS symptoms and hypermobility symptoms. And she was going to practitioners who were basically telling her, if you do not transform your life, and these were very spiritual practitioners who were very intuitive, they were like, if you do not transform your life, you'll never get over this anxiety. She was having debilitating panic attacks and anxiety as a result of, amongst many other symptoms, but those were really tough for her. And that really gave her so much more anxiety because of like the open-ended nature of the spiritual side of the conversation. So while, by the way, it was entirely true that she did actually have to change everything about her life in order for her to heal, what she needed was symptom support in that moment. And what she got was, now you have a mountain of stress that seems insurmountably hard. Let me throw another thing on top of it, which is that if you don't do this obscure, open-ended thing, you'll never get better. So I am deeply spiritual and I believe in the intuitive and spiritual side of MCAS, but I also want people to know if that just feels like, well, screw me then, because I'll never be able to heal. There's so many physical approaches you can take to start off with and then kind of build up to that.
Yeah, I think it's the good old two things being true at the same time duality conversation, because you've said before on this podcast that oftentimes anxiety is this messenger from the body that like something's not right. And if we look at that sentence in that more, spiritual, emotional lens of anxiety as a messenger that we need to change something about the way that we're moving through the world, our job, our purpose, all the things, that could be true. But at the same time, when you're already in such a deep anxiety hole and you're having trouble even just making it through each day, or seeing how your future could change, or seeing what step you even need to make to, start on a different path in life, you are already so overwhelmed, and you need an immediate, like you said, symptom stopping protocol to get you to a place where you're calm and clear enough where you can say, oh, okay, here's the next step that I can take. Now I can actually get into action instead of being frozen. And I feel like it's the same way with mast cell activation syndrome and histamine issues, where when you're already underneath the histamine mountain and you're just being pummeled with histamine from your mast cells, you need something to kind of break the cycle first, before and while you do the nervous system work, because now you're already in this dysregulated state, not even because you're dysregulated, you're in a dysregulated state because your immune system is screwing with you and creating more anxiety and confusion and inflammation. So it's just important to know that, like, if this is where you're starting, if you're saying, okay, I know that my stress is playing a huge role in my histamine issues, you also should be implementing a lot of the physical tools that we talked about and the dietary changes so that you can even get to a place where you can make sensible decisions about how to manage your stress.
So what does beginning to regulate your nervous system in the face of histamine issues look like? And what are some of the most counterproductive myths out there that get in people's way of doing the work?
There's a lot of posts out there that talk about how the key to healing your nervous system is activating your vagus nerve, and that all you need to do to have nervous system equilibrium is simply stimulate your vagus nerve. And you can do that through humming, singing, gargling, salt water, cold water therapy, all the things that like stimulate this vagus nerve. And while those things for sure have their place as tools, and if you're really having a panic attack and you dip your face in some ice cold water, you could stimulate your vagus nerve and maybe break the cycle for a second. Real deep nervous system work includes probably changing your entire lifestyle and starting to advocate for your needs and doing the really hard work of identifying what your emotions are, honoring them, telling yourself it's okay, I got you, girl. Like, it actually involves developing a self-relationship and being okay with your own needs and your worth, which is outside of your output, not just humming and stimulating your vagus nerve.
Absolutely. And I think the conversation online around the nervous system, like fight or flight, vagus nerve, we said it a million times.
Yeah, the nervous system is the key to health. The nervous system dysregulation is the key to the future of healing. We can say that a million times, but
let's talk real life, right?
Yeah.
If you're not feeling safe inside of your body, and if your body is a place that you want to jump out of, doing humming or gargling is probably not going to radically change your life in the short term. And what we want people to do is have pretty much radical symptom reduction so that they can like climb that Maslow's hierarchy of needs, from getting your physiological needs met all the way up to self-actualization. But to just bite it off as being like, do some nervous system stuff, it's very ambiguous and not fair, I think.
Yeah. And it's hard to go from feeling so unsafe in your body and so unsafe in the world and being used to moving in relationships from a place of survival mode, and maybe that almost creating more chaos in your life, to even knowing where you can start. And starting with things like affirmations or meditation often just doesn't feel true to where people are. Exactly. Because if you're living every day with this experience of like, I'm the worst, everything is wrong, I hate myself, being like, I love myself, I'm great, that's going to feel so dysregulating because of how untrue it feels. And that's not really that next step forward. Oftentimes it takes tiny little steps and bites of safety to go along this journey. And for me, it's taken years and years and years to feel safe in my body. We had talked last night about the archetype of someone with histamine issues, because you have so many clients now who have MCAS and histamine issues. And I'm like, what are the threads that you notice about these people? And I want you to paint the picture, because we all got a lot in common and we happen to be these very tightly wound type A folks. So changing that, or like creating more peace there in the way that we've always been, is not going to be an overnight process.
No. And I've done an episode on the podcast with a really good friend of mine who's a neuronutritionist, Tim Free. And we were talking about how people who have like adverse childhood experiences, this ACE score that people might have heard of before, tend to be, when they get older, something that I call hypervigilant people pleasers. So they're people who are already hypervigilant in their environment, looking around, how can I help people? What can I do? They're actually people who generally are hyper resilient as well, by the way. It's not like my clients who are incapacitated because they didn't try or because they're not those people. It's that they've been doing too much. It's often not that they're doing too little. It's often that they're doing too much. They are usually the people who have taken care of everyone else. And as a result, not realizing they were depleting their energy stores, depleting their nervous system capacity, and end up in this situation where they're very sick and people aren't necessarily taking care of them because they're the ones who take care of everyone else and everything. So they don't have the tools necessarily, and this is honest, to take care of themselves, but they have all the tools in the world to take care of everyone else. So it's really a group of people who most likely have ignored a lot of body cues going on in their body in favor of saving the world, doing these amazing things,
pushing on, continuing to be
being
productive.
successful, being productive, being amazing. Like, not saying they're not amazing. They're probably the most amazing, but there's a consequence to that and there's a double-edged sword to that. So that's a common thought I do see. Now, everyone's different, but it is usually, it's a lot of times that person who is the us persons also.
Yeah. What's interesting is that the way that the wellness industry up until this point, or like the way that it's snowballed in a sense to be this information overload or this competition of whose routine is more perfect, is actually kind of the perfect storm for this archetype of person who often happens to find themselves with histamine issues. Because you're describing a person who's like, not only do I have to be perfect in my career and for my family and for everyone else around me and for myself and for these like, you know, huge standards and ideals that I have internally, but now that I am dealing with health issues, I have to apply that immense brain power and like the gifts that I have towards figuring out my health issues and also steering that ship. And so I'm now going to consume all of this information and apply all of it at once. And if I'm not doing the wellness routines perfectly, then I'm never going to get better. And so they end up, and then I'm talking to myself here, they end up stressing themselves out by being like, well, I have to do the oil pulling and then the water picking and then all my supplements and then all my electrolytes and all the things, which I do have to do to stay alive. But sometimes the intensity of that routine and the intensity of the standards and like meeting that archetype of what we must do to get well, instead of learning how to listen to our bodies and what our bodies are asking for each day in our routine and how that might ebb and flow and having like the room for that flow and sway, that's actually kind of like where we want to get to instead of step one, which is applying everything all at once, critiquing ourselves when we can't do it perfectly, and getting into more of a flare.
It's much easier to slam supplements down than it is to religiously do putting your legs up on the wall when you wake up in the morning, drinking your 16 ounces of water. Like, the actual hard stuff is in some ways like the hard part of those things is the consistency. And also because a lot of the stuff that you need to do to help your nervous system or to help feel safe are very small things, and a lot of checking in a group of people who really don't want to check in with themselves because they're really not comfortable physically with what's going on. So they want to do everything. And they're coming to me and they're like, give me the supplements, baby. Give me and I'm like,
yeah, give me the complex protocol. Get the more complex, the better. Because I've just been trained that when things are really hard on paper, that's the only way that they work.
But it's a lot easier to take a fistful of supplements and have a huge histamine flare and then be mad at me. I love it. I'll take it, guys. I'll take the hits. Than it is to, for months straight, do exactly what you need to do for your body and sacrifice that lifestyle, whatever it is, to focus on yourself. It's really hard because people please because it makes them feel better to people please. We think they're doing it for the other people. I'm a people pleaser for sure. I can tell you that I feel physically uncomfortable if another person is uncomfortable in front of me. So it's partly for them and partly for me because I don't want another person to ever feel pain in their entire lives because it makes me feel bad. So I don't want that, right? So it's also about handling a different kind of discomfort. Again, these are mega resilient people. I really, really see that all the time. But it's like about sitting with discomfort that they don't want to sit with, which is themselves often.
It's so funny because you're talking about mega resilient people. And obviously we are in that group of people.
Hell yeah.
We are the type A people who found ourselves with histamine issues. That's why we're so fascinated by it and want to talk about it and share so much about it. But it's like, you're right. We're so willing to face the discomfort of our family members being in a crisis and saving the day. Very, very complex work issues and building entire companies, complex relationship issues. Like we're like, oh, we'll attack those things head on. But when it comes to the actual things that we need to do to heal for the nervous system, which we're going to talk about, which for me have been slowing down, saying no, being willing to be left out and not have experiences with my friends when my body actually needs rest, being willing to take the time to check in with myself and journal about my emotions and maybe have a cry once in a while, being willing to eat really consistently and nourish and fuel my system with water and electrolytes and protein, even when that's the last thing I want to do because I just want to keep pushing through and working so I can be more effective. Those things are, you're right, quite simple. But for those of us who have histamine issues and are that type of person, they are the hardest things to do.
It feels impossible to do those things, and it feels impossible to sit with that discomfort. And that is the crux of it. And I will, day in and day out, I have clients coming to me who want, again, those protocols, those things that seem really hard for other people are very easy for us.
Yes.
And and the reverse. It's about doing the things that seem really hard for us. And I'll even give an example. Taylor Goldberg, the amazing hypermobile chiro who's on this podcast, when we first started working together, she's like, I need you to do diaphragmatic breathing every day. And I'm like, I'm going to lift weights, Taylor. Okay. I'm not doing diaphragmatic breathing and taking 3 minutes out of my day. It's not going to make a difference. That's the other thing too, is that we don't believe that the things that seem easy, but we need consistency on, are going to truly make a difference for us. But those are what build the body trust and reliability between us and our body that start to transform that MCAS picture, in my opinion. It's about building body trust back, because after being sick for a long time, we lose trust with ourselves because we say, you couldn't save me before. Why would I believe you to save me now? I don't believe you can do this. I don't believe you have the tools.
And I don't believe that it should be allowed to be easy for me. I think that that's a big, like when you're saying all this was coming up for me, when I remember where I was, it was like, yeah, I would think about things like slowing down and taking deep breaths and just taking on less in my schedule. And I'd be like, how are those things ever going to help me? Those things would be enjoyable and would be, or, you know, enjoyable to an extent of like, I would get to lay down for a bit, you know?
Right.
And yet I didn't believe that I didn't believe that I was worthy of healing through ease and enjoyment. I thought I had to heal by continuing to push and almost like punish myself in a way and get through obstacles and punch my way through, because that's always how I was used to doing things. And that's where, for me, MCAS gets a little spiritual and woo-woo, where I'm like, in many ways, finding out that this is what's been at the root of all my chronic symptoms my whole life, that my immune system and my nervous system being overactivated is why I've been miserable for a large part of my life.
Yeah.
It is the biggest wake-up call that I've ever gotten of not only do you have to slow down and do things differently, but you are allowed to and you need to, and it would be beautiful for your body, and you have permission to slow down and do things differently. Because if you don't, you're not going to get better.
Yeah. There's this like understanding we have about the nervous system, that our nervous system learns by example. If you grew up in a chaotic environment, your body learns that that is the norm and that is safe. So by the time you're an adult, again, a lot of these autoimmune conditions start popping up for people because people have been hypervigilant that whole time. They're in this cascade of inflammation and cortisol issues for literally 30 years and don't realize. And by the time they're an adult and start becoming aware of what's going on with themselves, our body only understands safety to be unsafety.
Yes.
So it's totally normal for someone like you or I to have had experiences where in childhood, again, we saw unsafety is the norm,
Yes.
right?
That's where we got comfortable.
Right. And I mean, Olivia, I'm going to have to tease you a little bit on this one. You know, Olivia and Nick have like no blankets in their house, right? Like it's
we have
just,
one now.
They have, exactly, because I forced you to order one. Exactly. Like comforting yourself. And I think we talk a lot about how we're all too coddled as a society, and there are ways that we are.
Yeah.
But we do not have any idea on how to create comfort and safety for ourselves. Like, you don't sit on a couch, Liv. If you are home, you are up. Like, you are either in bed, dead,
Yes.
or you are running around your house like a chicken with your head cut off.
Mhm.
There is no, now it's much better, by the way, but there is no coming down. There is no in between.
Mhm.
I think that's what's really hard for people, is we don't understand how to create comfort when safety and comfort have been very foreign to us. So we don't know how to get there because it doesn't feel good to feel safe for a lot of us.
Yeah. You're just making me think, like, when you said the people pleaser archetype earlier, and then like the superwoman who does everything for everyone else. And then you're saying now of like the person who doesn't even take a chance to sit in their own home. You think about a lot of our mothers, right? Like this, I see the archetype of like the Italian mother or grandmother who's always, what do you need? What can I put on your plate? Never sitting down, never taking a moment for herself. Like when my aunt does Christmas, for example, it's like she's constantly on her feet. She's not stopping to eat a plate herself. She's seeing what everyone else needs. She's not taking a moment to sit or rest because she's wired to be like, it is only safe when everyone else is safe at the expense of me.
Yeah.
And that's how I think that's the underlying nervous system wiring in this immune and nervous system overactivation. And we have to start to model like, no, I have to kind of put my gas mask on first.
Yeah.
And then I can do a lot better of a job at taking care of everyone else.
And think about even like this word hypervigilance, right? I always think of Manhattan as a good example. When you're walking around Manhattan, I say it's the only place you have to look up, down, and sideways at the same time, right? You're like this at all times because you don't want to step and poop and you don't want someone to attack you. And what's going on with the weather? It's just, you have to be constantly on. Imagine being like that all of the time and what the consequences are for how your body functions, right? Because all of our bodies so connected, our immune system, our nervous system, our organs. I mean, every single part of our brain and body is connected and acting in a certain way. So you can imagine that if you're in a state of hypervigilance, looking around every second, you're not knowing what's going on in your body. And what's going on in your body is not going to feel good because there's organ-wide impacts of being like that all the time. And I think a lot of us don't realize that we're like that all the time. Let's talk about emotional labor in this conversation too.
Let's talk about
a phrase that I definitely didn't coin, but that I use a lot, which is that, and this happens with women a lot too, as just like gender roles, and I think probably some hormonal reasons as well, as I can imagine, but that there's a physical labor that a lot of us do. And then there's like this emotional labor, which is that you are literally helping people through your mind at all hours of the day and carrying also, like if I'm in a social situation, Liv, you know this, I need to make sure everyone in that room, if it's 100 people in the room or 5, I have to make sure everyone in the room is comfortable the entire time and that they feel like they're known as a person and they're witnessed. Like that level of intensity and that level of being on in that way all the time and carrying that labor emotionally, it's physical. It's not just emotional labor is physical labor, but I think people don't view it that way because they can say, you know, something along the lines of, I understand this person's like doing physical labor, but you can't see and understand what those impacts are inside. So when we start unpacking this, a lot of clients, again, what I'm seeing is they're so hypervigilant and they are so carrying so much emotional labor and they don't have an ounce of space for themselves.
It's the space thing.
Yeah.
It's actually like creating more space in your life, that because I'm trying to sit here and like rack my brain for what are the things that have helped me the most with my histamine issues and have helped me not have to rely as much on quercetin and Pepsid and all the things, where my flares are less and less and I feel more like a human more and more. And this concept of space keeps coming up for me. And I think that we have to acknowledge how real mental load is when you are quite literally carrying the mental load in your home, right? Because like you're the one knowing, okay, the laundry has to get done today. Even if your husband is willing to do the laundry and do the actual labor, you're the one that has to remember to tell him, hey, there's 2 loads that need to go in today, blah, 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 blah. He's happy to do it, but the load that you're carrying of being the orchestrator of that, of knowing the kid's soccer schedule, of knowing how many eggs are in the fridge and when the bread is on subscription to come and whatever, like oftentimes it's the women. Do you not have bread on subscription?
Do you?
Yes.
Do you even, I don't have bread in my house, but also like I didn't even know based on the comfort and operational capacity of the household that you would even be thinking about that, which is interesting for this conversation.
Operational maniac in my home. And like Nick and I sat down because my therapist had to really help us with she put in family meetings for us.
Love.
And in our first family meeting, which we do like once a month, I was like, what are all the things we need to automate? Let's put the aluminum foil on subscription. Sorry about it. I do have to use aluminum foil sometimes. Let's put the freaking garbage bags on subscription.
Oh, that's really smart, actually.
I've done a lot of subscription, which has really helped with the
That's
mental
awesome.
load.
Yeah.
But I have to do it for like the bread. You know, you see the lists I make on my fridge to remind myself what's inside of my fridge so that it doesn't go bad, because my brain is so neurodivergent and weird. And I'm not going to remember that I could use eggs to make an egg salad if I don't write it down.
Totally.
And it'll go bad. I have to do those kinds of things.
Mm-hmm.
So I carry a lot of mental load in my home, and I carry a lot of mental load in work because I made a company. So got to have the vision.
100% too.
Yeah, you have to hold that. And you know, there's just a lot where even though those are abstract concepts that we're holding in our mind, the fullness of that in the mind and the nervous system does create a lot of heaviness in the body and doesn't create a lot of space for us to feel like we can even physically breathe. I'm going to hold my belly again.
100%. Yeah, it's a way you're
just
holding
a little
it.
bit less, just a little less belly holding.
Completely agree. And I also feel like the people who are holding all that space wrap their identities, like us, up in our capacity to help other people. So when we can't even help ourselves, we get really down on ourselves from an identity perspective. And we're like, why the hell can't I get out of bed? I don't understand. Why is my heart rate going to 160? Why is this happening to me? What is going on? And why can't I figure this out? Like you said before, that pressure on ourselves to figure it out, in addition to the fact that we, in the first place, would rather be helping anyone besides ourselves. I would rather do the emotional labor of 100 people than my own and take on myself.
Why do you think that is?
It's scary. It's uncomfortable. It's not as validating. It's not as dopamine-y. You don't get any kickback.
Is it a worth thing? Is it like other people's happiness is worth more than mine? Because I'm trying to think of why do we like self-efface in that way where we want to be there so much for our friends and listen to our friends' problems, but we won't take time to journal or check in and be like, how am I feeling about this problem?
Because journaling and checking in feels bad often. If you don't feel good, why would you want to know how you're feeling? It's much easier to know how your friends are feeling and help them and troubleshoot it and sit in that space with them than it is to sit in, especially if you don't feel well, to sit in the space of discomfort within yourself. And then a lot of times people don't know what to do with it. So that's something that happens a lot with meditation and journaling. When people start these practices, they see themselves and they're not ready or comfortable seeing themselves. And then we don't have blankets in our house, Liv, and we don't have those things that actually give us comfort. We don't have any safety strategies. We don't have those things. And when we talk about safety too, again, I'm not talking about it from this like corny Instagram weird, I don't know. You know, it's like this whole weird nervous system conversation that's happening on Instagram that doesn't feel real. But like safety to me means almost like the absence of extreme symptoms, right? Like safety means feeling like you are with yourself and you're comfortable being with yourself and you are okay to be there. That's what safety feels like to me. And what it can be achieved with is all different strategies, like learning those different voices in our head, which we've talked about many times on this podcast, is so important. And also just learning what is your thing, right? Like blankets are everyone's thing, by the way, Liv. So you have to have blankets in your house. You have to. But for me, like I like nostalgia feels very safe for me. And I like love looking at, like, if I'm ever in like a weird moment, I'm looking at old pictures. I'm like listening to music that I liked when I was younger. And I like get into like a zone like that versus some people are like, that 1998 was a terrible year for me. I don't want to listen to one song from that year.
Wait,
but
that's interesting. Finding what feels safe to you. So that's what I was saying earlier about when you're seeking information online about how to regulate your nervous system, you're being thrown a list of 15 things and you think you have to do all 15.
Yeah.
But I think that there's something that happens when you disrupt the noise. You do maybe sit with yourself for a bit, right?
Sure,
like start to build that
can,
capacity and just check in with like, what would feel really nourishing right now versus what would feel punishing. Because maybe the 15 things, like the meditation and whatever, feels punishing because it's another thing you have to do. What's a thing that feels like you get to do? And it would be almost like a little guilty pleasure.
A little
like,
treat.
Like buying a blanket. That would be such a guilty little pleasure.
I love that you've been using it, by the way. I know I bring it up, but it is like really important to me because I'm like, when you're home, you can't only be sitting on the floor. That's
why I sit in the bath. The bath feels like woomy, warm comfort and like I'm safe in there. And I love enclosed spaces so much. Like put me in a closet. I'm so happy.
Put me in the cupboard under the stairs. I'm very comfortable.
But seriously, like as a kid, I used to just stuff myself in very small spaces. And my parents would be like, where'd she go? And I was like, I'm safe here.
That does feel safe.
Red flag.
By the way. And that's also like really important. I have a client who was also, I'm going to make her listen to this. She listens, but it'll take her time because she's very, very, very busy. But when we were first working together and she was in a relationship that was no longer safe, I used to make her go into a cupboard under her stairs and we called it her nook with what her name is, the ex nook. And she would go under the stairs and just read books. And we got like little Christmas lights and we would take sessions from the nook. Yeah. And that just felt like childlike, whatever it felt like.
Because like being in a cupboard is giving child and being in a bath is giving womb, and nostalgia of like, younger times, younger self is giving inner child. For me too, it's like I go back to what did I like to do as a child? Because I think that we're maybe a little bit more in touch with our instincts back then before the world gets in the way.
Yeah.
So I think as children, we actually had a wisdom that we don't have access to now yet. We're building it. But now we have access to information, which is what we think is wisdom. But wisdom is so different from information. And when we're children, there is just some kind of line that we have to ourselves that has not been disrupted yet, where we just naturally know what feels good and what we want. And so when you think back to being a child, if you really liked to read fiction books and like Nancy Drew and whatever, and all these like fantastical stories, if you can start to do that now as an adult, that might actually be the thing that's going to bring you way more nervous system safety than the humming, the gargling, and the meditation.
100%, especially if those things are a new task for you. If you're not normally humming, like you're a singer, you have a natural singing capacity. So do I? Yeah, you do. Did you know you were trained by Broadway singers when you were a kid?
I was.
But for you, that feels natural. Starting something new for the sake of helping your vagus nerve is not necessarily going to help you if it doesn't feel safe and familiar for you. Now, the problem is a lot of things that feel safe and familiar for us are probably potentially unsafe. So we kind of have to find and strike that balance.
Yeah. Another part that you wanted to talk about was nervous system resilience and building that resilience and building capacity. And I think a lot of what we hear, which I think is very helpful, I don't want to discount nervous system regulation talk.
Of course, yeah.
But a lot of what we hear is it's all about increasing your capacity and your nervous system capacity. And the greater your capacity can be to hold both discomfort and joy, the more you can sit with any type of dysregulating thing, the more that you can handle, something wrong happening at work or a tragedy in your family, the more that you're going to be able to respond to those very real common life events with a regulated body and system instead of going right into a flare or right into panic. So what are some ways that we can start to actually increase our capacity, and what is that capacity?
I love this question, and I'm going to answer it by also answering another question, and just want to explain one thing that I feel is really important. Our nervous system also connects with specific brain structures in our brain, our amygdala, hippocampus, and hypothalamus, which are part of a system of connection called our limbic system. And our limbic system is there to help us process memory, process emotions, and then basically tell the body, if the next situation happens, how do we act in that next situation? And it'll connect with our nervous system and our immune system to let them know if a threat comes up, how do we respond? Here's the problem with MCAS and POTS and these conditions that are chronic. We have the initial symptom that happens, right? And then our brain remembers how crappy it was when it happens. And then our brain will communicate with our limbic system and say, just in case that ever happens, why don't we mount a prophylactic attack throughout our entire body to make sure that this never happens again. And that response from our limbic system and our nervous system together is what actually makes the illness that we think of as MCAS, because it's this repeated immune response that's happening too often and too strong.
So it's just a person who's been used to really bad things happening a lot in their life, whose body starts to learn that bad things are always going to happen. So we might as well always be in an immune flare. That's what histamine issues
100%.
is. Great.
That's what it is, basically. And that could be, again, the bad thing that happened could have been in a viral attack. It could have been a parasite. It could have been anything physical.
Could have been COVID.
It could have been COVID. It could have been trauma. But it is a body that is in a hypervigilant state in every single level of the body. And I really, a lot of the programs that you hear of, like Primal Trust, Gupta program, incredible programs, are limbic system retraining programs to basically say, we can have a symptom, but not react to the symptom.
Yeah.
Because the problem is, again, our nervous system only learns through what it's seen.
I mean, I'm mirroring that right now too. If the body can have a symptom and feel physiologically and have a real physiological response of, this is temporary, I'm just going to have the symptom and let it go and not continue responding to the stress of the symptom, that means that it's mirroring, in a sense, our mind's capacity to have something bad happen to us and say, this is happening to me right now, but it's not going to happen forever. Because I can think back to when I was much sicker and had a lot more histamine symptoms, and especially when I was younger and had no idea what was going on, just the way that I used to look at the world was, I'm so afraid for something bad to happen, because when it does, it feels like it's never going to end. I used to have this, like, I would call it like emotional permanence. I know it's a term in psychology, but I would apply it to this and like borrow it, because it just felt like when I was going through a hard thing in life, the reason that hard things felt so unbearable to hold was that I was convinced that this moment was forever. I didn't have a perspective of like, this moment is just this moment. Things have been good before and they're going to be good again and they're going to be bad again. It just felt like whatever I was in was going to last forever.
Yeah, that is the epitome of the limbic system work, is really understanding the impermanence of it, that this is temporary and I have control in some level. What we can't control is the actual trauma. So I'm not saying that trauma isn't real and marks our cells and marks our immune system and our nervous system, and we can't really control how we subconsciously react to it either. What I'm saying is we can start to separate, this is a horrible symptom. I feel nauseous. I feel dizzy. I feel like I'm dying, from that extra response on top of it, which is, oh my God, why is this happening? I can't believe this is happening. What do I do about this? That creates illness. That's
so you're
what
saying half
is.
The problem with histamine issues is that you have a histamine reaction to something or a histamine flare. And instead of being like, oh, I'm having hives right now, this seems to be from histamine. Good to note. Let me employ my strategies and maybe take a bath and realize that tomorrow's a new day. The body, even internally on an immune level, says, oh my God, we're having a histamine response. We're having hives. This is so bad. I have to figure out what triggered it and how long it's going to last and everything I need to do and blah, 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 and what I did wrong. And it becomes this actual mental and physical cycle of inflammation that's happening as a response to the inflammation.
1000%. Yes. If people can understand that, they'll understand why we keep saying the nervous system is the most important thing. Now, there's a reason these limbic system programs exist, and they're fantastic, beyond fantastic. And then also there's things you can do at home by just starting to say, you might not be able to rewire it on the cellular level that these programs have, but just starting to say like, okay, I notice I have this symptom. I really don't like it, but it's just right now.
Yeah.
What can I do to help myself? And just even starting there is probably the most profound thing any of us can do for any chronic symptom, anxiety, gut issues, anything like that, is sitting in that. That's the sitting in the discomfort.
That's the capacity. That's like expanding your capacity. That's what it really means, is your capacity is your ability to be with whatever's happening in this moment and know that not only can you hold it and get through it, but there is more life after it. And things will not always be this way. Because I think I could apply that phrase that you just said to, oh, I'm having a fight with my boyfriend right now. It sucks at this moment, but it's not going to be like this forever. Because I think like the cycle that we get into that can add so much additional stress and also cause us to behave in a way that's maybe not in integrity with ourselves or from a place of stress or abandonment, even in those real life situations, is, oh, I'm having a fight with my boyfriend. It's going to be like this forever. It means he's going to leave me. It means he doesn't love me. It means that I'm terrible, blah, 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 blah. And we create the story around it. instead of building the capacity to just be with the reality that this is happening right now, how can I get curious? How can I get calm? And the calmer I can get, the more I can see the next step and the future with maybe a clearer mind.
I know there are people listening who are going, I hate you both because I can't help that I'm doing that. And I can't.
Yeah.
By the way, it is a physical response and it is a subconscious response.
A trauma response.
It's a trauma response. This is cellular. It's not like people are doing this because they're weak, anxious, anything like that. It is literally what your body is designed to do. What I'm actually asking people to do is go exactly against what their body is designed to do. Their body is designed to keep them safe, be hypervigilant, make sure nothing bad ever happens. That's why we have the limbic system and the nervous system. It is literally to protect us. But if it is left checked on, we get new symptoms. So these conditions cannot exist without this happening, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Even something, again, POTS, which we've talked about, is this form of dysautonomia. It's dysfunction of the autonomic nervous system. It's dysfunction of the nervous system. It's not a dysfunction of the heart. Sometimes it's a part of it, but oftentimes it's a dysfunction of the nervous system. So really the meat and potatoes is, how do I turn these symptoms into something that is much more temporary and I'm not engaging in that cycle of illness and feedback system of, I'm sick. Oh God, this is scary that I'm sick. This is never going to end. What do I do about it? I can't do anything about it. I'm helpless. And that going back and forth. So if you ask anyone who's healed tremendously from their MCAS symptoms, every single one of them will tell you, this is the work that was most necessary. You have to separate the symptoms from the response to the symptoms. You have a symptom, you sit with it, you say, I hate this. I notice it's here. It is going to be temporary. And let those thoughts that are coming up, this is never going to end. This is so horrible. How are we ever going to recover? This is the worst thing. This is the worst one. This is the big one. This is the big histamine flare. I've never been this bad. We rated against other ones. Was it that I ate the tomato sauce? Was it this? I hear you thoughts. I hear you. That is happening without people realizing it often too. We think we're all immune to this. I was the same way, by the way. When I first started, I was like, no, I'm very strong and this isn't happening to me. And then I was like, oh my gosh, like I was so scared because these symptoms are scary, Olivia. Like it's scary to be nauseous and dizzy and like feel like you're going to faint or literally faint. It's freaking scary.
Or be covered in hives all the time or be anxious all the time or all the things that can happen with histamine stuff. It is scary and it's not a fun way to live at all. So you do become hypervigilant to what's going to flare me, what's safe, what's this, what's that, how was it my fault that this happened again, especially if that's your childhood patterning.
Exactly. And that's, I think, my favorite thing that I do with clients is starting to separate that symptom from that response because that's where they get the most benefit. And when it like clicks, it's very life-changing for people. So, you have to experience it yourself because I know there's people listening who are like, you're telling me to change my trauma response. And I'm like, I'm totally not. I'm asking us to understand the landscape of the responses we're having.
But do you think there's an element of having to practice this in your real life in order to be able to do it with symptoms? Because I was only kind of able to get there once I was able to start doing that process in my life with emotions that were unrelated to symptoms. So as an example, an emotion that I've felt a lot of my life is shame. I've felt shame for existing. I felt shame for taking up space. I've felt shame for who I am as a woman and like sexuality. That's a whole other, conversation. But that was probably like the biggest thing the biggest emotion that I can remember, this experience of shame that had a hold on me and created a lot of sadness and depression and anxiety. And I think once I learned how to be like, okay, I am going to recognize this shame, put it here, sit with it, and realize that the shame is not who I am and is not me, but it is something that I can be with and sit with and say, I see you, shame, and just start to kind of like just create some space for without internalizing. I think that helped to build my nervous system capacity to do that with symptoms and say, this current feeling of shame is not the end of the world and is not who I am. Thus, this current symptom is not the end of the world and this is not who I am. Do you think it has to happen on both sides and how?
I think it can happen either direction. I'm so glad you shared that and it's so relevant. When people are sick chronically, they feel like the worst about themselves usually in that illness, right? Because they feel like I can't help myself. They're embarrassed about their symptoms. I found for myself the way to like abolish the shame is that I'll wear a freaking neck brace on. I would wear a neck brace on a date. I wouldn't care if I was like dating, you know, and I'm like married. But if I was like dating, I would wear a neck brace on a date if I had to. I will wear my compression socks in the airport. I will do anything I have to and be a complete and total freak in whatever capacity I need to in order to make myself feel safe and to prove to myself that the things that I need are okay and good. So you can either do it in other parts of your life. And again, like whatever way you need to feel stronger about yourself, because usually the sick part of us is the part we feel is weakest. And it's the version of us that we hate the most generally. So, or if it's, again, if we're working on something like binge eating, like the part of us that binge eats is the one that we feel the most shame around. And the part of us that is sick is the one we feel the most shame around. It might be easier to build your self-confidence and build your resilience in other areas first and with other not symptoms or other parts of yourself, because all of this is about building reliability and trust with yourself. And it's probably easier to build trust with yourself, even as like a friend, right? Like maybe being a really good friend to someone else is easier than being a really good friend to yourself. Maybe you start there, but the end goal is to build your confidence, to build your self-reliance, and to build your self-trust. So yeah, some people might not be able to start within the symptoms, but start building that outside of yourself. It could be easier.
It sounds like owning that you're a freak is kind of like the way to heal histamine issues.
Always.
And I say that because first we mentioned step one sort of being recognizing what it is that makes you feel safe in the first place. Just finding a thing that gives you a sense of personal safety, even if it isn't the trendy thing, even if it isn't the green juice, even if it's cuddling in a blanket or staying home on Friday nights and being the weirdo freak that's like, just wants to chill with a cup of tea. And then it sounds like step two is actually being able to sort of participate in exposure therapy and honor what those things are and realize that by doing those things, not only are you actually creating safety in your body actively, but you are building trust with yourself because you were able to do those things even though they were scary. So whether that's, like you said, putting a neck brace on when you're flying, if you know that that helps to prevent cervical instability in your neck and prevent a histamine flare, if that looks like saying no to more social events, if you're realizing that you're getting very socially overwhelmed or socially overstimulated or being in environments where there's a lot of drinking and a lot of stress is what triggers you. Any of those things you have to learn to kind of like radically apply. And by doing that, you're probably going to displease a lot of people. And that's almost the way to fight the people pleasing and the stress that's underneath the archetype of the histamine person.
Yep. And I think that the freak part of it is self-knowing, self-trust. It's about building the antidote to nervous system dysregulation around chronic illness is knowing yourself and knowing what you need and giving what you need to yourself. There is really no other.
Knowing what you need, giving yourself that thing that you need. Those are like the two steps to nervous system regulation and
actual safety.
Yeah.
I think there's nothing safer in the world than to know yourself and to be known by other people. That's what makes me feel the safest is like, you know, as an example, like let's say it's something, you know, when I was having really, really, really bad symptoms and I remember I had violent tremors as part of it. And they were like really, really painful and really scary because I had no idea what was happening. And my husband would come in the room and I'm like, here's the deal. I need you to get a really heavy blanket. Like I didn't have a weighted blanket, but I had like now the blanket you have, like a very heavy blanket. And I'm like, I need you to just literally lay on top of my body with the blanket and like hold my body down basically to stop these tremors. And we were just laughing about it because I'm like, how is this my life right now? Like I'm 32. Like, how is this my life right now? But I was like, but it is. And so what he would ask then is like, need me to do the blanket tremor thing? Like, what do we need to do? You know?
I mean, it sounded like you were also challenged in that moment to really ask for help instead of constantly
I don't like
help.
that. Yeah, I don't like that. You know, I don't like that. I don't like asking
Big
for
part
help.
of nervous system safety, asking for help.
100%. And then also just, you know, again, you know, I think I have like the most exceptional husband in the entire world. And he is like a total freak too in the best way possible. But he learned then what was like the thing. So if we're flying somewhere, I'm like, hey, here's the deal. I'll fly. I need to have 24 full hours of me not talking to a person besides you once we land so that I can heal from the flight. And then we can go do all the rest of the stuff. But this is what I need. And he just respects and honors it so that I can make my life bigger.
I feel like so much of the nervous system regulation piece is just no longer viciously ignoring what you need in order to seem more normal to everybody else.
Hell yeah.
That's like a big part of it, because oftentimes, like you said, we have highly sensitive bodies. That's the whole thing. Histamine folks, we just are more sensitive to others' emotions, to chemicals, to all the things. That's just, part of our curse and our gifts. And so with that being said, we're probably going to have odd needs that match what our unique, highly sensitive body would like. And I remember something that happened with Nick. Nick is also highly sensitive, highly psychic.
And a cutie.
Highly psychic cutie. And so when we used to travel a lot for work, when he was working a lot more with OO, we would go to California or do long flights, and he would become so dysregulated from the flight. And we would often have to, engage in a work event 1 or 2 days after we touched down. And he would just be dysregulated the entire rest of the trip. And this is the beauty of relationship and having people that see you and are able to reflect back your needs, especially when you aren't even at the point where you can see them. I would say to him, it seems like you might actually need a good 4 days, perhaps, like in the beginning, because he was so stressed. Now he's better. He needs like 2 days. But I'm like, it sounds like you might need 4 days to adjust to the time zone, to spend some time alone feeling safe in the neighborhood. Because Nick's big thing is like actual physical safety, growing up
environmental, social, like literal physical safety.
Yeah. And I started to realize that because of Nick's unique childhood experiences and dealing with so much violence in his neighborhood and the way that he constantly moves through the world, checking for threats everywhere, he needed not only time to adjust to the time zone and the new location, but time to like drive around the neighborhood and see where escape routes would be, get to know the type of people in the neighborhood. He actually needed to create safety in the place that we were in, because after having such a traumatic childhood violence-wise and neighborhood-wise, his nervous system capacity was so limited that he could only feel safe like in our home, really. So I realized that travel was such a big trigger for him because of that unique set of childhood trauma. It's a trigger for me for very different reasons, but for him, that was the thing. And so I would start to schedule our trips where we'd have a few extra days in the beginning where I would just let him go and roam and let him go and acclimate and feel like he had some sense of safety or connection in the neighborhood or knew who a neighbor was if we were staying at an Airbnb. And then he would regulate and he would be able to show up the rest of the trip. But, to another person, or like if he was on a trip with a bunch of guy friends and said to them, hey, I need to fly in 2 days early so I can regulate my nervous system, that takes a lot of self-knowing and a lot of self-respect and self-love to be able to be that vulnerable.
Right?
Yeah, self-advocacy, to be able to be that vulnerable with other people, to say, I know this may be odd or may not be what you need, but this is what I need and I'm going to honor it. So it's like, it's a journey of taking the risk of honoring yourself. And before that, it's a journey of even starting to get curious, my word, starting to get curious about what some of those odd, quote unquote, needs might be. So I want to ask you, where can somebody start if they are at the point where they're like, I don't even know what my needs might be? Where do I begin?
Yeah. I would have people separate a piece of paper and have one side be potential triggers, times I felt worst. What is that? What does that look like? Things that I know help me no matter what. These are my go-to tools, the things that I know work. And then I want a third column that's where am I going? And I'll tell you this candid personal story also, which is at the lowest point in my health where I could barely walk without my heart rate going crazy. It was like months. It was really scary. I remember walking past myself in the mirror and I had my neck brace on. I had a back brace on. Every inch of my cells and my muscles and body hurt. Like I can't explain to you. In my head, there was no outlet for it because I couldn't even be comfortable sitting. There was no comfort. I could not strike it. But I do remember looking at myself in the mirror and being like, you're never going to make it through this. I just remember saying that to myself. And then another part of me kicked on and looked at me to myself Another, because I do want us to all talk to ourselves.
You
I think
didn't
it's really
say it,
important.
but I heard it.
Exactly. Another Michelle came out and said, you will never say that again. Don't ever say that again. Because I realize how much the visualization part of this and like being silly and just praying and hoping, like, I have no freaking clue how I'm getting out of this, but I'm gonna get out of this. That is so unbelievably important, because remember, if our nervous system only knows what it's seen, it's never going to believe that something good is going to happen if only bad crap has happened to us. So we have to make it up. You have to make it up in your head, and you have to be bold, and you have to be badass, and you have to be a little bit silly about it too. And just be like, I was like, you're never going to say that again. Let's go crawl to get back to the chair, to get back to the bed. Because I actually sit on a computer chair to push myself to get from the bathroom to the bed. And I was like, and I remember saying to myself, to get back on that computer chair, sister, like just get back on the computer chair, whatever. Like it's so ridiculous sometimes how we have to live our lives. But the goal with all of this, with the nervous system piece, is make your world bigger. When we are sick, when our nervous system loses capacity, our world gets smaller and smaller and smaller. So the goal for Nick might not be to travel and not have to do that, but maybe he only has to explore for 2 days one day. Maybe that's going to be safe enough. But you have to find out what's triggering me, what is my unsafety, and you have to figure out what's your like recovery ratio too.
Yeah.
You know, when we, as you guys heard from the first part of this episode, we were talking about how in our trip to Austin, you like came to my room and you were like, don't you always not sleep for like 3 nights when you first land? Like you just went on a flight a month ago and you slept
the first night.
You slept the first night. Like it's not about our bodies being normal or whatever. It's about us making it work and then slowly increasing that capacity so that we can do these things we would never imagine we'd be able to do. But it's got to be slow, and you need to know where you're at. So that's what I would help people do first. Write your triggers, write where you're at, write the worst things that could happen, write the times you felt best. And then I would have, what's the dream here? Like, what are we going towards? Introduce the idea to your nervous system that you're going to be able to heal. And I know it sounds gaslighty and it sounds like dismissive. I know if you're listening to this, you may have been through stuff I could not even imagine.
And the
my worst
practitioners and all the different things. And like
100%.
You don't have hope. Yeah.
I'm asking you to be crazy a little bit. I'm asking you to go against what your body is telling you to do, which is to be scared and to be locked into fear. I'm asking you to do something unnatural. And that takes creativity and imagination and laughter. And it takes seeing yourself and being like, this is where I'm at.
It's like self-acceptance, literally.
It's totally
so much of it is that.
Yeah.
And even just in the things that you might need as your personal health boundaries to get better, that takes self-accepting. You have to accept these are my boundaries first before you can even tell them to the world or start to act on them. Because if you don't accept them, you're not going to be able to uphold them. And I think about when you say making that list, I'm like, okay, think back to 3 years ago. What would have been on my list? I definitely would have written working on the computer too late at night increases my histamine symptoms. I used to always notice whenever I go past 6 p.m. on the computer, my fingers are swollen. I'm losing circulation in my legs. I'm getting heart palpitations. And I used to think it's just my circadian rhythm. And if that were to be on my list and I were to be able to just start there and recognize late night computer work triggers me, then I could perhaps know that what my body needs is a hard stop with computer work at 5 p.m. each day, no matter what that means for other people. They are going to have to adjust to the lesser output that I create when I draw the boundary that I need, which is computer down at 5 p.m. Because I think a big part of this too is for those of us who are the recovering type A perfectionists that need to have such a high output in order to take care of other people. It doesn't necessarily mean that we get to that high output quickly. We like to do things with such care and perfection that it often does take us a long time to do things. So if we were to actually set, for example, healthy boundaries around our work and just do a 9 to 5 and stop there, we would probably have a lot less of an output than people are used to receiving from us because of how long it takes us to do good work.
And they won't like it. No one
they're
likes
not going to like that.
No, they're not going to like us for that. No.
Exactly. And so just recognizing that boundary of like, people need to adjust to my pace. I can't keep overextending myself to meet the expectations that I've now created by pushing myself.
Yeah.
And just by recognizing that one first need of computer down at 5 p.m., that can be where your nervous system actually starts to feel safe. Because if you uphold that boundary for yourself and you actually close your computer at 5 p.m. for 7 days straight, all of a sudden you have trust. All of a sudden your body says, oh my God, I can rely on her to do something good for me. We can start to totally shift this snowball and start to build in the right direction. But it is really, really hard to say no to those things and to be what we would think is less for other people.
Because then we are eroding what we think is our self-worth and our self-confidence, when in reality, that needs to come from us knowing that we're good inherently.
Well, I think our self-confidence needs to come from doing our best.
Reliability.
It can't
and
really come from
yeah.
our output. I think that's a big reframe I had to make with nervous system work and MCAS and all the things, is that my internal barometer for if I am a productive, worthy, successful person cannot be the actual amount that I create or my output or the product that I make. It just has to be, did I show up every single day and do my best? Yeah. Did I do whatever I could that day within the parameters of what I was able to give without hurting myself? And as long as I did that, I could feel good and I could move into the next day, and I could actually probably do more the next day because I was actually well rested and my body was happier with me. Mm-hmm. So it has to start somewhere. But I think the internal self-worth and identity around productivity is a big piece of like the spiritual, emotional MCAS picture.
I agree too. And I think when I was looking in the mirror, that was all self-worth, because my self-worth like kicked on, because I was like, you're trash, dude, and you're not making it through this. And then I was like, who says who? Don't talk to me like that. And that real authentic part of myself showed up. And I think people don't understand how lucky they are to have themselves on their team, especially if you're this person. If you're any person, like, we look for resources to feel better outside of ourselves. Like, we are so blessed that we have ourselves in us. There's always, and Olivia, we joke about this, but there's always that dog in all of us. You know, you got to have that dog in you. And that there is in every single one of us.
Even if it's a pug.
Even if it's a little pug. But you have to have that dog in you. And you do. Every single person does. If you are at a point where your body is so smart that it has gotten its way into a chronic illness cycle, it means that you are creative. It means that you are innovative. It means that your body is on all the time. We just have to switch it to be something that's a more productive use of these amazing skills that we all have.
Yeah.
And switch it.
I think when you're healing your nervous system, that dog in you needs to go towards ferociously owning who you are, who you're not, and what your needs are, so that you can show up for yourself and for others. And that dog does not have to go towards ferociously self-effacing,
producing,
and just doing whatever to do the maximum output to help everybody else and to like be the people pleaser and the perfectionist. That dog's energy must be redirected towards the also very equally hard work of knowing thyself and owning thy needs. Like, that's, I now that we're talking about this, I'm like, so much of nervous system regulation and building nervous system capacity is actually just owning who we are, how weird we are, where our limits are, what we actually want to be doing with our time, and not what we think we should be doing with our time based on some arbitrary marker of worth. It's actually accepting our weird and moving through the world in the way that we need to versus how society tells us to. And that's a lot of walking back and deconditioning and reparenting that we have to do to tell our inner selves and inner child that it's okay to be who you really are and to have your needs.
Like, there's a difference again, and I love the vagus nerve tactics, but there's a difference between like going to hum and then when you're in the lowest moment of your life, having a part of you come out and say, I got you.
Yeah.
And we're going to do this together and we're going to make it through, and it feel authentic, like the closest person to you in the world, the person who cares most about you, the toughest person you know, saying, I got you. It's irreplaceable. It's that's what safety is, right? Is feeling held and feeling that self-relationship and self-trust, that's how you're actually going to get the change in this cycle. Because if our nervous system isn't going to reroute from little tactics, our nervous system is going to reroute from knowing, oh, I was wrong to freak out like that. Sorry, I didn't know we were good. We're good?
Yeah.
Okay, I don't need to react like that next time then. I know we're good. I know that it's okay. That's the only way our nervous system learns. So every single time you engage with yourself, you're creating a new pathway for your nervous system in the future. And I think that's what's really important. And rewiring that limbic system threat response, because your body's like, oh, I didn't know when we have hives, it just sucks. And then we move on. I didn't realize that. Okay, got it. Now I don't have to freak out, because the symptoms that I think are most excruciating are those anxiety reaction, constant cyclical
ruminating
symptoms.
on it.
That's the torture part of it.
Yeah. Do you think that voice in the mirror that said, you're never going to get through this, actually sounded like, you're never going to get through this?
That Olivia's imitating my mom. No, you know what's so funny? My mom is the opposite. My mom is hyper resilient. She would be like,
maybe it was your mom's voice that came through and said, never say that again.
So I think this is so important to talk about too. You know, I have a dad who's like the softest, mushiest man in the entire world. And my mom is like tough as nails, can get through anything kind of woman. And my dad, like if I would stub my toe, this is the total truth. If I would stub my toe as a kid, my dad would go, my poor baby, what can I do? How do I help you? And he would be so reactive that I would then get anxious that he was upset. And it created like this dynamic versus my mom would be like, literally get over it. Like you have to move on from this. Get over it. So that beautiful balance of like having that soft place to land with my dad and then that like really tough keep going place with my mom was important, because probably earlier in that same day when that voice came out, I probably was like, oh, do you need a blanket? This is terrible. Like you're having a terrible time, you know? And I always laugh about it. And that's kind of the voice I'll use with myself. Like, oh man, this is really bad, right? Like I hate this. And then when it push came to shove, I needed that hyper resilient dog to come out too.
Well, I think the reason I asked that is because, I've talked about it on the show before, and we've talked about identifying the voice in your head and whose voice that is. And I think for a lot of my life, the voice in my head that used to beat me up and contribute to my stress by telling me how terrible I was all the time, and the shame voice was really just my mom's voice to herself. And I think so often as children, when we have a parent that is very self-effacing and self-deprecating and self-hating out loud, because my mom would just kind of share with me how much she hated herself, or like she would say, I don't want to go out in public with you because I don't want to be seen because I'm so ugly. She would really say things like that. So it just made a lot of sense that as an adult, our internal voice is often the voice of a parent, especially our closest parent. And so much of the nervous system regulation part starts with kind of differentiating and asking, whose voice is that? Does that sound like me? Is that something I would say to myself? And if I did have a chance to talk to my inner child right now, what would I say to her instead? It's just being able to be curious enough to ask those questions and have those conversations with yourself. And I just want to acknowledge everyone out there who did grow up with voices that were either unkind to them or unkind to themselves, because maybe the way in which you're responding to anxiety or the way in which you're responding to symptoms of this is the end of the world, I'm never going to get better, is not actually your voice. And this is why I'm so big on the inner child and inner mother work and choosing to be your own inner mother and choosing what her voice gets to sound like, because now you get to be your own mother and you get to do it differently. I think that there's a lot of room for learning how to rewire that voice and practicing and doing silly things. Like I used to lay on my bed and just rub my chest and be like, I'm with you. I got you. And I didn't necessarily like have that as a kid. So it felt quite uncomfortable at first. And I felt stupid at times laying there talking to myself like I was a little baby. But it really helped. And sometimes that's what it's going to take. That's the work that us perfectionist MCAS girls want to avoid, because we'd rather torture ourselves with a juice detox or take 20 supplements than lay on a bed and be like, it's okay, honey, I'm with you. Because that feels vulnerable and that feels weird and that feels unsafe, because our childhood was more punishment, do. So we like the self-deprecating detox. But not only did I get to replace that voice, the inner mother voice with the soft, I'm with you, I also then would say to myself, okay, who are the people in my life that make me feel safe on the other side with the resilience piece? Who are the people in my life that talk to me the way I wish my mom talked to me in terms of, you got this. Don't ever say that to yourself again. There's always going to be a solution. And I would actually, I'm so grateful. I've actually been able to pull examples and models of that voice from the strong women in my life. I often think of Donna, who I have a feeling will be listening to this. But Donna's someone who always makes me feel really safe. I work with her in my company. She's the president. And she, whenever there's an issue or a problem, she just says, okay, no sweat, we'll find a way. Yeah, there's always a solution. She doesn't even question. She doesn't do the whole Amatrano side of the, oh no, how are we going to get through this? It's never going to get better. She does the, why are you even thinking about it? We'll figure it out. It's all good. There's always a way. That's Donna's thing. There's always a way.
I love that.
So I was able to recognize how safe that relationship makes me feel, recognize that I want to take that as part of my voice. And I had to make a conscious effort of when something's going wrong in my life, being like, what would Donna say? Or what would Michelle say? They'd say, there's always a way. You're going to get through this. You know who you are. Don't ever think you're anybody else. And so there's so much merit to healing in community, because this is another thing we talk about in wellness. It's often like, how can we work on ourselves? How can we get better? And of course, this is self-regulation. You do have to learn how to regulate yourself and come into a room regulated so that you can be with other people. But we also have to rely on others. And we also have beautiful relationships with other people for a reason, so that they can be our models of how they treat us, can be a little bit of how we can learn to treat ourselves.
I love that so much. I'm moved by that. And the community aspect of it is so important because people feel so isolated when they're sick. So just like for anyone listening who's going through any kind of chronic illness, just understanding like first and foremost where you are isn't your fault. If again, you recognize like, oh my God, my brain is doing that thing. It's completely normal. It's what your brain's designed to do. Yeah. And just know you are never, ever backed into a corner. There's never a too late. There's never a too sick. There's always a way. Mm-hmm. There's a way to either feel better from a symptom perspective, or there's a way to feel better about the symptoms. Yes. So there's always something you can do. We all have the Donna in us. We all have the dog in us. Mm-hmm. And again, even when you're feeling so weak and feeling so disconnected, just know you can draw strength from things you've heard. You can draw strength from people you know. So it doesn't have to be that, especially if you're feeling ultra isolated, you don't have to lean on people, but you can lean on what you've seen in other people's strength too. And you don't have to draw it from yourself. These are little mental switches. It's not like you have seen energy.
It in other people, you have it in you.
Totally.
That's the thing.
We all have it.
If you can recognize something in someone else and you can see it and admire it, you're only seeing it and admiring it because you have that already within you. They're mirroring that for you. We are mirrors for each other, and that's why we need each other.
We did an episode on Quiet the oh my God, I'm going to make you do this. We did an episode on Quiet the Diet with my whole staff, and we talked about healing anthems and songs that like were for healing. And my song that I chose like 4 because I'm very greedy, but my song, like when it comes to choosing songs of healing, are you kidding? Was I Won't Back Down by Tom Petty. And like, again, for me, what I was doing during healing was just playing that song because I'm like, I don't feel like I feel like I'm backing down. I feel like I can't do this, but I'm like, but Tom Petty had chronic back pain and he got on stage. I mean, it ended up kind of killing him, which is horrible, but I would listen to that song and I'm like, all right, I'm doing Tom Petty right now. I would listen to Queen. I would listen to like a lot of classic rock that's about rebellion. And for me, rebellion is really important in healing and feeling like just, it doesn't matter. This word we always use, relentless. Like you have to be so relentless in healing. And that sucks, by the way. And I wish we didn't have to be, but I'm like, I don't have it today, but Tom Petty has it. So I'm going to listen to Tom Petty. I won't back down. And I would just, if I could only walk around the block once in the beginning of my reconditioning after the neck injury, I was like, all right, we're doing Tom Petty 1 block. Let's do it. I would listen to I Won't Back Down 3 times. Yeah. Go back inside. What's your healing song, Liv? I never asked you on a podcast.
Rockabye Baby by Sean Paul and Jesse Glein.
Tell us why.
It's actually kind of like a modern EDM lullaby to a baby that they're gonna keep safe.
Aww.
And Sean Paul gets into his usual
Sean
trope.
Paul, sure.
Yeah, Sean Paul. And yeah, it's like about I just have an inner child playlist on my Spotify, which I'll link in the notes. But there's a bunch of those songs. There's Bird Set Free by Sia on that playlist. There's just all of these songs about like, a girl who didn't necessarily feel
Nina
held.
chose that song, I think.
Really?
She chose a Sia song. I don't know if it's that song, but she chose a Sia song and it was really powerful.
But there's all these songs on that playlist about, a girl who doesn't necessarily feel held or seen by the world or free and is now feeling that empowerment. And so what you're saying about using music is a beautiful parallel to what we just talked about with using other people's voice and, replacing a maladaptive voice with a really healthy, loving voice in your life. We should be drawing on strength from others. We should be using others' creations and art as tools to help us embody what we want to embody, and utilizing music as an embodiment tool because it can change the way that we're showing up, the way that we're feeling cellularly, mentally, all the things. It can inspire such, visceral confidence in us. I think it's just such a smart thing to, in a nervous system regulation episode, to be like, yeah, lean on the music that makes you feel like you can get through this and that this moment isn't forever.
No.
Because when you're stuck in an emotional loop and you're only feeling rumination, worry, doom, shame, and you can put music on that switches you into a different emotional state, I mean, that's like magic.
Magic.
Music is magical. Other people are magical. And I think when you said the list earlier, right? You said to make a list of the things that you do that cause flares, that make things worse, that make things better, that make you feel really good so that you can start to map out and have a relationship with yourself and your body of like, what's good, what's not for my particular vessel. I think it's also a wise idea to take stock of that in a similar way in terms of your relationships. I think it's a good practice to be like, what relationships in my life, when I'm talking to them on the phone or when I'm with them, do I feel drained after? What relationships do I want to go smoke a blunt after I'm with them? Or am I like, that was like my biggest thing when I was in a relationship where I couldn't kind of hold my own and regulate with them, or where their dysregulation was like getting into my bubble and I just wasn't strong enough, right, at the time to hold my own, because I don't think it's someone else's fault for being dysregulated. I just wasn't strong enough at the time to hold my bubble. And I would always know it by me wanting to use a substance while I was with them, or me wanting to like overeat a lot while I was with them. And that was my only sign. I didn't have the language of, I am not able to regulate my nervous system around this person. All I could say was, I really want to be high right now.
Exactly.
And so that was my cue. And so it's a good idea to be like, okay, just noticing these relationships, maybe at this stage in my healing, I need to take a little bit of distance from, or set certain boundaries in, or spend less time with. Not that I'm going to cut them out. And then these relationships are the ones that I feel poured into, that I feel stronger after I speak to them, that I feel inspired, that I feel like they see me and I see them, that I feel like it's an even two-way exchange and we're really helping each other. And leaning on those relationships to be this like arm in your healing.
There's the people who see you and know you are going to give you energy. The people who don't understand you are going to take that energy away from you. I had like a little bit of a friendship breakup, but it was because I was in this spot in my life when I was in this neck brace and I went to one of their parties and I felt really like they were like, kind of like, get over it a little bit. And I was like, I can't spend time with these people right now because my mindset was so vulnerable on if I was going to get better that I was like, I'm too vulnerable right now to have that infiltrate me. So this is the same thing where when I made the Highly Sensitive Body Hub, I was like, I'm not going to have a comment section, and I still don't, because if one person says, I'm never going to heal from this, another person could be triggered permanently from that. Yeah. So you might need to be a little more protective of yourself during those times, and your nervous system capacity might be lower. You know, again, if I'm traveling, you know, in the beginning of this, Olivia, for us to even go to Austin, the two of us, it was like a schlep. It was hard for our bodies. We didn't understand our bodies fully, and we didn't know what we needed necessarily, right? And at that time, I would say I had like a 1-to-1 healing ratio. You do an event one day, I need a full 24 hours to recover. Now I'm doing 4 events a weekend.
Yes.
without a question. I don't even use antihistamines at this point. Like maybe once every 3 months I'll take one. Like at the time we were taking 4 and I was wearing a neck brace and I couldn't even look at people in the eye because my entire body would start shaking if I moved my neck an inch. Like, but that's where I was then. And I was like, but don't think you're going to go and not have symptoms. As you're healing, you're going to feel bad along the way. And then you're going to feel less bad as time goes on.
But still go and just know the recuperation that you need from going.
And don't be shocked by the recuperation.
Yes. Because I think as we're healing, as we recognize that we have, certain chronic symptoms and histamine issues and all the things, and that our nervous system is dysregulated, and we're starting to put language to that and acknowledge and validate that we're living in a body that's suffering, right? Especially when doctors have not acknowledged that for many years. There's a certain part of that where it can become our identity and where it can also prevent us from then living our lives. Because we'll say, okay, I can go and be social when I'm healed. But there just is no drop of a pin on a map that's at healed. That just doesn't exist. That's not a real location. We'll never be, quote, healed. This is a lifelong journey of just learning how to live in our bodies and what we need. And so if you continue putting off your real life and putting off the very real social connections and fun and experiences and all of the things that can pour into you as a human and help you continue to find out who you are and what your needs are, in lieu of healing, like you said, your world is going to get a lot smaller. So the goal is to continue going out there, continue living while you're, quote, healing.
Get sick. Go out, get sick.
And have symptoms and build that capacity to be with the fact that this is going to happen to me. I might have some symptoms from this, but it's worth it because I'm a human and I deserve to live my life just like everyone else. And I'm only going to learn from this more about what I need. And I can give that to myself. I'm giving myself permission to go to this event, maybe have a flare and be in bed the next day. I'm planning that into my weekend and I'm not overscheduling myself because I'm finally recognizing and advocating for my needs. That's really what nervous system regulation is about. In this episode, we can't give you a list of here's the 10 steps to heal your nervous system.
By the way, if you want that, just go on Instagram. It's like vagus nerve humming, it's there. You can find it.
But that's the funny thing. Because I just used to see podcast episodes like that. Like we got to give them the list of like the tangible steps and nuggets. But it's so much more nuanced than that, where it's just how you learn to show up and own who you are and what your needs are and still show up anyway, even when you're going to get hurt. That's the whole thing of being in relationship with people. My favorite post of yours. Your favorite post of mine. Relationships are going to hurt you, but they're still worth it.
Yeah. Oh no, I agree with it. I just don't agree that you were yourself in the post, by the way, just for people who are hearing that. Yeah. It's the game of nervous system regulation is knowing yourself, giving yourself what you need and being really patient with yourself and understanding that while things aren't going to be perfect, they are going to be okay. You'll never know how. Olivia, I couldn't tell you how me and you got to this point where we could sit in the studio and talk for hours and not have those physical symptoms. So Olivia, in the beginning, right, when we were both of us on our MCAS journeys, if I would have asked you like, oh, what helped you get to this point? Maybe you would have been like, it's going to be Pepsid that's going to take me to the finish line. What do you actually think brought you so much further along in your healing journey?
Accepting that there's certain things I don't care about and can't care about, and that doesn't make me a bad person. That's number one. That's how I got here. Accepting that it is okay that I just don't care about certain things. Number 2 was learning how to prioritize. And again, knowing that it's okay to prioritize and I'm not a bad person that I prioritize and that it's just part of what I need. And what I prioritize in my life is going to look a lot different from what someone else prioritizes. And that doesn't make me or them better or worse. Number 3 is saying no a lot more, spending a lot more time at home in my own energy to balance how much I love to be extremely present when I'm social. Realizing that socializing for me is being so in it with people and just like completely in my heart with them. And thus I'm going to need some recovery time, but I still need both. I can't completely isolate and I can't completely overschedule myself. So finding balance socially, because people are a big part of my healing. Hydrating with enough electrolytes and salt. Salt has been huge for me. I didn't realize how much salt I personally needed. Salt is antihistamine. It helps with POTS. It helps with all the things. It really helps to regulate my nervous system. Eating very, 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 very consistently, even when I don't want to eat, doing protein powder and water and a piece of toast on the side. That is my go-to meal. It's not high fiber and high color and antioxidant, but sometimes it's the only way I will eat, and sometimes it's what I have to do. And accepting that I'm weird and can no longer pretend to be a person that's not weird, and the world is just going to have to deal with it. That's how I helped my MCAS. I'll add one more. I would say making art and getting in touch with my inner child. I think that's one of the biggest pieces, because I think a lot of my suppressed creative energy and not allowing myself to make art or think it was a valid use of my time was suppressing a lot of my identity and my humanity, and was creating a lot of stress. And now I really make time for my art. I make time for reading fiction. I make time for the things I loved to do as a kid. And it's brought a lot more safety into my life to balance all the other big stuff that I also want to do that is not always safe. Like taking risks in business and making a podcast. That's not safe, but I do it because it's worth it, because it could help people and make an impact in the world. So you kind of need the safety to balance the not safe things that we as humans do, because we have a drive to grow.
Absolutely.
What about you? What would you say got you from where you were totally debilitated with MCAS to where you are today, not even needing antihistamines?
I think embracing the freak, embracing the inner weird, which is something that I've historically done, but I think I would unleash parts of me that I thought were still cool to be weird and unique. And this was like, no, it's definitely not cool to wear a neck brace. Like, it is just straight up not good. Like in ways of like social acceptability, it's definitely not good. But I was like, I'm going to make those kind of funny and make those just like take it or leave it kind of energy.
Funny, laughing
Totally.
at ourselves, and even at the very real stuff we have to do to feel well sometimes. Just bringing lightness and laughter.
Absolutely. Being so unserious about this too, which is like, I'm like, yeah, Jeremy, you got to lay on me with a heavy blanket. It's going to be weird. Like, yeah, I'm violently shaking for literally no reason. I have no traceable reason for why this happened. I must have eaten a high histamine, whatever it was. But I was like, this is where we are right now. It's crazy we're here, but guess what? We're here. So much acceptance to myself. And then I think, part that made me ashamed when I was younger, especially growing up in a larger body, was like not wanting to express anger about things, because I didn't want to feel like I was like big and angry. And I feel like
I didn't want to be big and angry.
Exactly. Yeah. That's kind of like a
ya.
thing. There's like a apology to the world thing. Sometimes when you're a larger body, you feel like you owe something to the world.
Just for those who don't know you and maybe you're listening to this for the first time, just like one sentence of context.
So I had always grown up in a larger body, and I feel like I had lost 100 pounds when I was going into college, and I felt like in a larger body, I owed something to the world, and I had to act even more in a specific way because you're so constantly looked at and scrutinized when you're in a larger body. So I never wanted to be like sloppy. I never wanted to be what appeared to be like greedy or something, gluttonous, like something like that. And I never wanted to come off as angry. I wanted to be a certain type of like funny fat girl, quote unquote, and not a different type.
Mm-hmm.
And so anger was something that I was really uncomfortable with, and also was very judgmental of in myself. And then on this journey, I like really let myself just be like, this totally sucks. And I'm really pissed off about it. And I really let myself express that anger, where I've been like, trying to suppress that for a long time. I think that was really important for me. And then also just adopting that absolutely relentless mindset. There was because I've called myself a relentless provider with my clients forever, but I was not always relentless with myself. And it's really hard for me with the people pleasing to disappoint people. It's really, really hard for me.
I know it is.
It's like excruciatingly hard for me. Yeah, it's very, very hard for me. And so like saying no, even to my mother-in-law, to go to like certain dinners and stuff, like she knows how much it was hard for me, but it was like, I was like, I'm gonna get out there again. I'll be at the dinners again. And again, I just carried that vision. I'm like, Michelle, just do the things that you know are good, and it's gonna turn out okay. But you don't know that it's gonna turn out okay. You wouldn't have known. Like, Olivia, there's no way we had the foresight to know. If I am good to myself and create self-reliability, then it will help my MCAS symptoms. Like, you don't know, but you just do what is good and what we know works. And then you somehow get there.
Yep.
But you don't really understand, oh, my symptoms are going to go away in this amount of time, and that's a message with my clients all the time. I get the question. I have 3 and 6 month programs. All my practitioners, we have 3 and 6 month programs. They're like, will I get full symptom resolution in 6 months? I'm like, I have no way of knowing that. What I do know is you can build the tools that will last you a lifetime in every area of life. You can do that in a day.
Mm-hmm.
You just have to have someone who sees you, and you have to have that
someone who helps
self-reflection.
you see your needs.
Someone who facilitates you seeing your own needs. Exactly.
Yes.
And we've learned your body and we learn your game.
Yeah.
All of our bodies have a different game. That's a guarantee I can make. But I can never make a guarantee that someone's symptoms will reduce in X amount of time. And that's very unethical if people are doing that. I do not do that.
Yeah. No, it's the long game with MCAS because it's spiritual. It's our body saying, you're living in a way that's denying yourself. You really got to learn to see yourself and move differently. I like that you brought up anger. I think that's been important for my journey as well.
Oh my God. You've been so much. Like,
I've been angry. I
when
love
we
it.
first started hanging out, you like what you're like, I describe you as being a very gentle person. You are, and you're you don't like to say mean things about people. Like that's a beautiful trait to have. But when something would happen that would be harmful to you, you would also not express it. And then if I would bring it up, you'd be like, I don't know, they didn't mean to. And, I don't know. And I'm like, no, they kind of treated you poorly and it kind of wasn't cool. And it's okay to talk about. And I think you've definitely let the dog out a little bit. I think so. That dog in you is coming out.
Well, because with the anger piece, I learned that I don't have to, I was afraid of my anger because I felt, especially growing up in a house where there was a lot of anger, I felt like anger was dangerous because if you have it, it's going to come out and it's going to hurt you and other people. And I used to use my anger to defend myself a lot in my childhood. And I didn't like the person that it made me. Nice. And that graduated into my relationship in my early days with Nick. And that was something we worked on a lot, where he was like, you can be mad, you can't be mean. And I was like, oh, you're just not going to allow this. Like, he modeled so much safety in our relationship that I just no longer needed that tool of my anger. And I no longer needed to, fiercely send it outwards to protect myself. And so I was like, it must have been a bad thing, so must suppress it down. And then I realized that no, my anger is still allowed to exist. I'm allowed to be angry at things. I actually have to be angry about things because my anger is my greatest messenger as to where my boundaries are and who's crossing my boundaries. And I think in the years that I suppressed my anger, I let a lot of people into my life and let a lot of people pass the threshold that shouldn't have come past the threshold because I was denying the very real signals of my anger when people were making me feel uncomfortable. And I was doing the whole, well, I can just understand why they do that, knowing psychology, they hurt people kind of thing, and was sort of gaslighting myself. Now, it's not that I have a relationship with my anger where I actively get angry at people, but it's I have a relationship where I can recognize, anger is coming up here. This may be a situation where I need to choose differently or not allow this person access in the same way or set a boundary or whatever. And I'm actually able to use it to guide my life and to say my very necessary no's. And saying no, I really would say is like the biggest key to my own nervous system regulation.
Me too, but I hate it. I don't like it. I don't like any of this, by the way. It's not that fun. It wasn't that fun.
It's not easy.
It's not easy. It's definitely the stuff. It's always the nervous system game it's always the one thing your nervous system doesn't want to do.
Yeah.
Is always the thing that it needs the most because you are going against that human side of yourself. But I've loved watching you be a little bit angrier. I've loved watching it because it's made you happier, honestly. And I feel the same for myself.
Because I'm not lying to myself. I think a big part of nervous system dysregulation is like hiding things from ourselves to try to protect ourselves. And like hiding our needs to try to protect ourselves in the sense of staying safe by meeting everyone else's needs. And the more honest you can be with yourself, honesty is my number one.
It is.
The more honest you can be with yourself, in doses, it doesn't happen right away. But the more you can take ownership and responsibility and honesty, the more you can also see where other people need to take ownership and just be a lot more real about your life and be more unapologetic. I think this is a place that we admire in older people. We're like, oh my God, that 80-year-old woman who's so unapologetic and just knows what she needs and doesn't take the bullshit and whatever. Like, I love her. But if we're 30 and try to do that, people are like, what are you doing saying no to me and being unapologetic?
It's a woman
and
thing too. There's a little bit of a woman problem with
There's
that
a little
too.
woman thing happening.
That's part of the autoimmune conditions. 80% of all autoimmune conditions being a woman. There's a societal suppression piece of this here.
Yeah. But I think I've just decided that for my nervous system, I'm going to live like an 80-year-old now. I'm going to just have that unapologetic. I've lived enough life
We
to
eat
know
like 80-year-olds.
that this ain't worth
We
my
kind of
time.
live like 80-year-olds actually too. Like we live like healthy 80-year-olds or very unhealthy 30-year-olds.
Yeah. Sick.
And you know
and
what?
we own it.
Yeah. And we're adorable for it. I love it. Yeah, exactly.
Fabulous. Well, I hope this was helpful to you guys. And thanks so much for listening, and hang in there with your journey and keep writing out your needs and like trying to even get to know yourself on paper. I think that's been, I know you're not maybe the biggest fan of journaling, but journaling has really helped me a lot
I'm a huge
too.
writer.
Yeah.
I won a creative writing award in 8th grade. I'm a writer. You know, I'm a writer anyway.
She's a writer.
But I think it's just where people are at. Too.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's
yeah. If
important.
all you can say on paper is I'm sad, or like if you wake up in the morning, you just want to dump. Yeah. I hate this. I hate how I feel right now. That's maybe your first step towards being honest with yourself. And how cool is that? You don't have to go further. You don't have to answer it all in one day.
And this is the last thing I need to leave people with. I'm telling you, I do not care where you're at. If you are listening to this, there is always hope. There is no end. There is no backed into a corner. There is no too far. There is always something you can do. And thank goodness you have you on your team. What an asset you have with you. Oh, you're so lucky.
Keep killing it. By that, I mean the histamines.